This is Colin O'Keefe for LXBN TV. On today's episode, we are taking a close look at the Texas Uniform Trade Secrets Act, which went into effect in September of last year. Joining me now to discuss its finer points is attorney Randy Bruchmiller. He is in Houston with Seyfarth. Randy, when we're taking a look at this new piece of legislation, what misconceptions have you seen floating around out there? What should lawyers and those in the business community be aware of?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that sticks out on the front end is that under the new act, it has a specific provision that says any actual or threatened misappropriation may be enjoined. And I think a number of lawyers around the legal community here have interpreted that threatened misappropriation to mean somehow that Texas has now adopted the inevitable disclosure doctrine, which the Texas Supreme Court has never weighed in on. And I think folks may be jumping the gun a little bit with that conclusion because, number one, if the Texas Supreme Court or the Texas legislature, I should say, meant that, then they could have come out and said that and specifically spelled that out in the statute. Also, this particular provision comes from the Uniform Trade Secrets Act itself, which Texas just adopted. It did not throw in that particular provision, in and of itself. And if you look across the country at other states, there's, and probably half the states out there specifically reject the inevitable disclosure doctrine, but nevertheless, they have adopted this same Uniform Trade Secrets Act, and it has this very same provision. So I think people may be reading too much into that, but we'll see. There haven't been any appellate court decisions yet out interpreting this, and so we'll see ultimately if they're right or if they've jumped the gun a little.
I see. And then the second part in taking a look at this is that I understand that the new legislation calls for attorney's fees for the prevailing party in certain circumstances. And just as I say certain circumstances, it makes it sound like there's a bit of gray area here. So can you help us shed some light on that? Where might there be, once again, a bit of gray area on these attorney's fees?
Sure. I think the biggest part of that where there's some gray area is what is really a prevailing party. And there's a number of times where this particular issue has been addressed by the Texas courts. And in some circumstances, in a similar type statute, the Texas Theft Liability Act, if you obtained only damages and did not obtain, if you obtained only injunctive relief and did not obtain damages, you did not get your attorney's fees. In fact, the other side would be considered the prevailing party and would get their attorney's fees. Here, I think, though, that in and of itself is going to operate a little bit differently because injunctive relief is authorized under the Texas Uniform Trade Secrets Act. So I think a party may be able to get their attorney's fees if they got injunctive relief only. But I would throw the caveat that is probably if you get a permanent injunction at trial. I think courts will ultimately interpret getting simply a restraining order on the front end or a temporary injunction early in the case. Those may not be sufficient enough to qualify to get you attorney's fees. And the reason is, for instance, a temporary restraining order, which is only in place for 14 days, many times those are ex parte, and there's not even an opposing party there to show up and say what the other side is. And so it would be a little unfair to saddle the other side then with attorney's fees because they prevailed at getting a restraining order. So ultimately, again, this is one that we'll see how the courts interpret it, the appellate courts over the next year, and we'll probably have some more guidance at that point.
Absolutely. Sometimes with new pieces of legislation, you need, for better or worse, a little bit of litigation as well before you really get a sense for its finer points. Once again, that was Randy Bruchmiller of Seyfarth. For more of our video interviews, be sure to visit us, if you're not here already, of course, at LXBN.com. Thanks for joining me, Randy.
Thank you, Colin.